My Fair Lady is one of the most critically acclaimed movie musicals, and maybe even movies in general, of all time. It's a fan favorite, a visual masterpiece, a timeless classic. I've seen the movie a few times before and am very familiar with some of the more popular songs in this musical, but it was never a favorite of mine that I watched over and over again. I decided to revisit it again after many years. I have good memories of watching the movie, and I already knew that the movie has some absolutely brilliant songs. But when I watched this movie again recently, I couldn't really decide how I felt about it. I was left quite conflicted. There were some things that I absolutely loved about the movie, but there were some big issues with the movie that I didn't remember having. So, I thought it would be interesting to discuss the pros and cons that I picked up on while watching the film again for the first time in something like 10 years. Before we get into all the pros and cons, I'll give a brief plot overview so that if you haven't seen the movie or if you needed a refresher, you'll be able to better understand the points that I give later. And of course, this whole video is going to contain spoilers for the film, so here's your warning. Eliza Doolittle is a poor flower girl who makes a living by selling flowers on the street. Professor Henry Higgins studies phonetics and on this particular night has been studying the way Eliza speaks. He runs into Colonel Hugh Pickering, who is a phonetics colleague. Higgins says that he thinks he would be able to pass Eliza off as a duchess if he was able to teach her how to speak more properly. Eliza's dream is to run her own flower shop, but that's out of reach for her because of her accent. She goes to Higgins' house the next day and asks for lessons. Higgins and Pickering concoct a bet to help Eliza with her accent to see if they will be able to pass her off as a duchess. Eliza's father, Alfred P. Doolittle, learns that Higgins took Eliza in and he shows up at his house for money. Higgins gives him £5 and recommends him to a wealthy friend. Eliza works on her accent with Higgins. She finally starts to get the hang of it, and she is taken on a trial run to Ascot Racecourse, a horse race. When watching the race, she accidentally reverts to her old accent. At this horse race, she meets Freddie Eynsford Hill, who instantly becomes smitten with her. For Eliza's final test, they go to an embassy ball. Over the course of the night, it is guessed that she is a Hungarian princess. When they all arrive back at home, Higgins celebrates his success. They don't acknowledge Eliza's hard work or acknowledge her future now that this experiment is over. She leaves and goes back to her old life, but she finds that she doesn't belong anymore. Higgins finds Eliza at his mother's house and tries to convince her to come back to him. She says she will never see him again and leaves. He leaves and thinks about how he actually has gotten attached to her over time. He goes home and listens to old recordings of her voice, and she appears behind him. Casting. Audrey Hepburn. The casting controversy. In order to fully discuss Audrey Hepburn's casting in this film, there is one very important piece of behind-the-scenes history to understand. The Broadway production of My Fair Lady opened in 1956. The original cast comprised of Rex Harrison playing Professor Henry Higgins, Julie Andrews playing Eliza Doolittle, and Stanley Holloway playing Alfred P. Doolittle. The show was a smash hit. For the most part, critics loved it. The original cast recording was the best-selling album in the United States of 1956, and by the start of 1959, My Fair Lady became the biggest-grossing Broadway show of all time. When it came time to cast the film, the role of Eliza Doolittle was offered to Audrey Hepburn. Many of the public felt that the role should have been given to Julie Andrews, who contributed to the great success of the original Broadway version. Audrey's casting was controversial mostly for this reason. The press and the public loved to pit these two women against each other and create a rivalry amongst them. Another important component of this casting controversy is the decision to dub Audrey's voice. They decided to dub Audrey's singing voice with the voice of Marni Nixon, a very experienced singer and dubber. They tried to keep this under wraps, but it eventually got out that for the most part, Audrey was not singing her own songs. When the Academy Awards rolled around, My Fair Lady received 12 nominations, including all the major acting awards, except for Best Actress. Audrey wasn't even nominated, and it's thought that this was due to the whole casting controversy, and the cherry on top was that she wasn't even doing her own singing. Julie Andrews went on to win the Academy Award for Best Actress that year for her work in Mary Poppins. Cons: Audrey's casting. Dubbing. As a huge musical fan, I am someone who really advocates for bringing Broadway talents to the screen. They will certainly deliver, but are rarely given the chance to display their talents and perform for a wider audience. It's a pet peeve of mine when people are cast in movie musicals just because of their name and star power, without considering whether they can perform the role adequately, specifically whether they can do the extensive singing and dancing that is typically required in these roles. So, as much as I love Audrey, it is frustrating for me that they didn't cast someone who could look the part, perform the role, and do the singing. They prioritized money over art. Recouping costs is something that needs to be considered, especially when making such a high-budget film like this. But by making so many decisions focusing on the financial aspect, the art quality goes by the wayside. Audrey did work very hard on her singing, but it wasn't quite up to par, especially when considering they could have had Julie Andrews, who originated the part, on Broadway. I don't fault Audrey at all for this, but I do count this as a con towards casting because the producers should have seen that Audrey wasn't the best fit for this role. They knew from the beginning that they were likely going to have to dub her voice. The only explanation here is that Audrey was a huge star and they wanted her in the film. To me, it would be a deal breaker if you suspected from the beginning that Audrey would need to be dubbed. Audrey as Eliza, the flower girl. I don't think that Audrey is the best fit for the pre-transformation Eliza, the Cockney flower girl. Eliza Doolittle is a notoriously difficult role to cast because it's 2 roles in one. The actress has to be able to pull off the poor, lowly flower girl Eliza, as well as the regal, high-class Eliza, and has to be believable in both roles. You can put as much dirt on Audrey's face as you'd like, and you can dress her up in the rattiest clothes, but she is still going to be beautiful and elegant and regal. And I don't think this is anything Audrey could have fixed. She maybe could have done more in terms of slight mannerisms, but that still doesn't change her presence and beauty. Take this scene, for example. This is Eliza's first song, Wouldn't It Be Loverly? She just received charity money from Henry Higgins, spare change for him, but a substantial sum for her. She is surrounded by her working-class friends and dreams about how it would be to live a life of luxury, not having to worry about working to barely make ends meet. The lyrics of the song emphasize her class position with how she pronounces words, loverly, oo for who, and eat for heat. But something that I noticed about Audrey's performance of the song is her hands. Audrey started ballet dancing at a very young age, which explains her grace and poise, which she became well known for. I think that shows through in this scene. Her hand positioning and movements would have been second nature to her, and she likely didn't even notice she was doing it, but it's something that draws me out of the fantasy. It may be a small thing, but it's one example that contributes to me not being able to believe her to be this poor, ugly girl. And perhaps this opinion has been morphed by Audrey's legacy over time. She still is one of the most beloved actresses, well known for her beauty and grace. So it's difficult to see her as anything but that, even when dressed up in rags. Pros: Audrey's casting. Audrey as Eliza, the princess. The second half of the film, Eliza is transformed into a regal beauty. Once she starts speaking correctly, she instantly transforms into a member of upper society. There is a transition period where she completely looks the part, her accent is pretty spot on, but she is less knowledgeable about social norms and faux pas in high society. One of my favorite parts of the movie is where she has her first test run at the horse race, and she tries to have a conversation with Henry Higgins' mother and her friends, a very stuffy, polite, distant group. Henry neglected this part of her training, thinking it wasn't too important. He advises her to stick to topics of the weather and health. She does stick to those topics, and her accent is improved, her mannerisms are perfect, but she has this over-the-top, snobby drawl to her voice, and the conversation takes a terrible turn and is tragically bad, but hysterical.
My aunt died of influenza, so they said, but it's my belief they done the old woman in. Done her in?
Audrey fits perfectly in this part of the role. She has the comedy chops to be able to play this mismatched Eliza stuck between worlds, and she is perfect for the elegant final stage Eliza. Her beauty and elegance are unmatched. As Harry Paris puts it in his 1996 biography, Audrey Hepburn, Audrey was not terribly convincing, even to herself, as the flower girl. She had been cast primarily for the transformation, and she executed it deftly. From I Could Have Danced All Night, she takes off, said Jeremy Brett. No one can touch her from there on. Audrey's legacy. Audrey is far from terrible as flower girl Eliza. She performs the part relatively well, it's just not as solid a fit as it could have been with someone else. Although Audrey isn't the best fit for the pre-transformation Eliza, she does shine brightly as the post-transformation Eliza. Audrey was not the best possible fit, she was just the easy money-making option at the time, which is why I do see some things to critique. But overall, I do think that she was a good compromise as someone who could perform the role well as bring in loads of theatergoers and money. This casting choice has been set in stone for almost 60 years. We can complain all we like about it, but it's not going to help anything. Since it's done, I am happy that Audrey was cast because I do love her in general, and I'm glad that we have such an iconic role to watch her in. Pro: Rex Harrison as Henry Higgins and Stanley Holloway as Alfred P. Doolittle. I don't have much to say about the casting for Henry Higgins and Alfred P. Doolittle. I have no complaints about Rex Harrison or Stanley Holloway, but I do want to acknowledge how much I appreciate that they cast original Broadway members in these roles. Julie Andrews wasn't cast, but at least Rex Harrison and Stanley Holloway were. They were not first choices for the roles, but the parts did eventually go to them, which I am so thankful for. Characters. Eliza. Pro: Eliza's character development. Eliza's character develops immensely as the story progresses. Not only does she go through such an obvious external transformation, but she also grows internally. On the outside, she goes from this dirty, scowling gutter girl to this esteemed, classy beauty. But she also gains confidence in herself, in her aspirations in life, and her expectations of how she should be treated by others. I find the last scene or two to be a bit contradictory to this character development, but we will get to that later. Higgins. Con: unlikable and no character development. Higgins' character is unlikable. On my first viewing, it was really difficult for me to read whether he was intentionally unlikable or if he was coming off worse for me than he does for other viewers, or if his character just hasn't aged well. After additional research and a subsequent viewing, I now understand that he is intentionally grumpy and rude. But despite these characteristics, he is supposed to be lovable. After learning that he was intentionally written to be grumpy and rude, his blatant disregard for others is very funny, but I still wouldn't say he's a likable character. And he stays the same throughout the story. He doesn't ever learn anything, acknowledge his mistakes, or change his behavior. He has his eureka moment where he realizes that he misses Eliza, but he never apologizes to her. He doesn't do anything to change. I have seen the argument that this was done intentionally to call into question the assumptions set by society that Eliza is the uncivilized party and that Higgins is the more civilized party. Eliza undergoes this massive development and learns so much over the course of the story. She develops this new confidence, but does not have the attitude that she is infallible or has nothing left to learn. Higgins is at the top of the food chain and acts like he is so much better than Eliza, when really she one-ups him with how dedicated she is to her work. There are many variations of this type of thought, but I think one quote that encapsulates this well is one from Socrates. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Higgins is wrong for thinking that he knows everything, he's done progressing. Eliza shows the real wisdom for continuing to evolve. Higgins is the one that's stuck in a rut. I can see this argument, but I still think of Higgins' unlikability and stagnant growth as a con. Pro: funny moments. Higgins is unlikable over most of the film, but most of the comedic moments in the film come from his character. It doesn't quite make up for his overall negative character, but it does help with the overall enjoyment of the film. The way he insults people, usually Eliza, right in front of her, or how little he cares about what happens to her are so blatantly rude I can't help but laugh.
Yes, you squashed cabbage leaf. She's so deliciously low. So horribly dirty.
I swallowed one.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I got plenty more. Open your mouth. 1, 2.
Con. Characters in general. The characters in general don't stand out much in my opinion. I don't really have a strong emotional response to any of them, even Eliza really. There are 5 main characters that we get to know well enough to know their names. We have Eliza, Higgins, Alfred, Colonel Pickering, and Freddie. We don't get to see too much of Colonel Pickering and Freddie, and what we do see is pretty surface level. Colonel Pickering is part of this high-class, highly educated society, but is nicer than Higgins is. Pickering seems to exist more to show how ridiculous and uncompromising Higgins is, rather than existing for his own purpose. Freddie is similar. We only get to see his boyish desire and obsession with Eliza. His character exists more to show Eliza's independence and immersion into high society, rather than existing for his own purpose. Alfred is a bit more complex. He is a mess of a father, he's kind of a scumbag, but Eliza loves him anyway. We see him go through his own journey, but he seems to mostly be there for comedic value. And as I've said before, Higgins is unlikable and doesn't show much remorse or feeling and takes no accountability for the way he treated Eliza, so there's no reason why I would be attached to him. The only character I even partially care about is Eliza, and even for her, I'm not particularly worried or concerned for her. I think this might have to do with the nature of the film and story. It's very grounded and realistic. The most fantastical thing here is the surprise princess story, a commoner being able to experience this upwards trajectory into the upper class. Of course, Eliza goes through her own hardship and struggles with the thought of what is going to happen to her after this experiment, but these stakes are relatively low in comparison to other films or musicals. If anything, she'll just return to her old life after she's gotten a taste of the easy life. Even if she's unable to continue this upper-class lifestyle, she still would be in a better situation than she was at the start of this journey because of all that she's learned. Not to discount her struggles, but I think this lower-risk situation, combined with a grounded atmosphere, dry dialogue, other unlikable characters, all contribute to this lack of emotional connection. Plot, setting, and script. Pro. Similarity to the stage version. This isn't a video comparing the film to the stage version or comparing it to the original Shaw play, but I did just want to say that the film does seem to be very faithful to the stage version, which I appreciate. In movie musical adaptations, usually a lot of cuts are made. Usually there are several songs that are removed. Here, there are a few songs that are moved around, and there are a few instrumental songs that are removed or modified, but most of the material is intact. So I do really appreciate how faithful the film is to the original. Con. Stuffy and drags on. In my opinion, at times the plot can drag a bit too long. It doesn't feel too terribly long, surprisingly, for the film being almost 3 hours long, but I do think that it drags a little bit, especially after the embassy ball. The story isn't too complex, and we don't get to know the characters too well for how long we've spent with them. Other musicals of a similar time length can cover a greater expanse of characters and their stories. The Les Miserables movie, just as one example, is 2 hours and 40 minutes long. It has many, many characters that we get to know well, ones that we will cry with and cry for. We get to see them grow up and grow old, and somehow they're able to fit all of that in 2 hours and 40 minutes in a way that is very emotionally impactful. I'm not saying every musical has to be like this, but just as a comparison, My Fair Lady can feel a little simple at times. This also comes down to its more grounded, realistic atmosphere. Con. Difficult to understand. I think the movie can be difficult to understand, especially on a first watch. The characters don't use Old English, but they definitely use a dated way of speaking. The dialogue is distinct, not only in the posh accents and thick Cockney accents used, but also because of the more formal way of speaking they used back then. This difficulty in understanding some of the dialogue caused some of the plot to get confused, which is maybe one of the reasons why I wasn't fully able to understand the intentions behind Higgins' character. If I had understood more of the subtleties and details contained within the dialogue, I probably would have caught on to that quicker. Con, ending and romance. A specific plot point that I did not like was the ending. My Fair Lady is inspired by the 1913 play Pygmalion, written by George Bernard Shaw. The original play ends with Eliza leaving Higgins and never coming back. The musical takes more direct inspiration from the 1938 film version of Pygmalion, which changes the ending. The musical My Fair Lady's ending is almost exactly the same as the 1938 version of Pygmalion. The 1938 film and musical film adaptation both contain the ending where Eliza comes back to Higgins. I think this completely contradicts Eliza's character development. Thematically, I don't think it makes sense for her to come back. Plus, I find the romance completely unnecessary. Throughout my viewing of the film, I did not see Eliza and Higgins' relationship to be romantic whatsoever. Their relationship was so not romantic in my eyes that I was very confused by the ending. I found it rather ambiguous. Does she end up with Higgins romantically? Or is she coming back to their mentorship type of relationship? I do think this ending was meant to be fairly ambiguous, but the common consensus seems to be that this does end romantically. Higgins treats Eliza so badly for the entirety of the movie, there's no reason for me to believe that he loves her, and there's definitely no reason that I would believe she loves him back, unless it's due to some sort of Stockholm syndrome. Higgins' epiphany moment, where he realizes he loves her, is basically just him saying that he'll miss having her around, which doesn't necessarily have romantic implications. Even in this moment, he doesn't show anything that is clear romantic expression, and even if it was intended to be romantic, I still think it's too little too late. Pro, atmospheric setting. I think the movie feels very atmospheric. It feels very British, maybe because of the focus placed on perfecting the English language. It all feels very immersive and well thought out. The working class areas feel very worn, grounded, and imperfect. We spend a lot of time in Higgins' house, which parallels well with his personality. It's filled with a massive library and dark wooden walls, contrasted to Higgins' mother's house, which is a more classic rich lady's house with light colors and a nice garden. The horse race and embassy ball all feel very grand and majestic. All of the different settings are very visually impressive and all reflect Eliza's inner and outer transformation and corresponding placement in society. One of my favorite moments that drips with atmosphere and feeling is when Eliza goes back to visit Covent Garden and nobody recognizes her. As her song plays, you can feel the nostalgia Eliza has for her old life as she realizes that she no longer fits in here anymore. Music and performances. Now I will go through all the main songs. No reprises or instrumentals. These won't be categorized into pros and cons, but will be more of a free-flowing discussion. Why Can't the English? This is Henry Higgins' first song. This is when Higgins and Pickering first meet Eliza and hear her speak. Higgins is criticizing her improper way of speaking and says that this is what has put her in her low place in society. Henry Higgins' songs utilize a music technique called Spreekgezang, which is defined as a style of dramatic vocalization intermediate between speech and song. It's a personal preference, but I don't like this talk singing.
Hear them down in Soho Square, dropping H's everywhere, speaking English.
There's not much melody there to work with, which makes it boring, in my opinion. The lyrics are important to the story, but I think they could have found a way to make the music more melodic and interesting. Though, it does fit Higgins' character better for him to be talk singing rather than bursting into full operatic riffs. It fits his professional, intellectual, stuffy personality to be talking, so it sounds more like he's lecturing everyone, and it makes sense with a more grounded, realistic tone of the film and setting. But, again, it's just a personal preference that this makes for a boring, unmemorable song. And this is the first song, so it's usually a big number that grabs your attention, but this one is very underwhelming. Wouldn't It Be Loverly? This is Eliza's first song that she sings after being given some charity money from Higgins. She sings about her dreams and what it would be like to live comfortably, with no worries. This is a more traditional song with full singing and melody, so I appreciate this one a lot more. I like the tune of the song. It is a little bit repetitive and simple, but it's a cute little song. I like the word choice that emphasizes Eliza's Cockney accent.
For me to eat lots of cow, make lots of eat.
As for the dubbing, Marnie is of course a very good professional singer. I just think it's very obvious that it doesn't match with Audrey's voice. Not because of anything that Marnie did, for instance not matching up syllables correctly, but it just doesn't sound like a voice that could come out of Audrey's body. There is footage of Audrey singing her own part in this song.
Lots of eat. Warm face, warm hands, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it lovely?
While her voice is definitely weaker than Marnie's, it almost fits the character better, and definitely just suits Audrey better because it's her actual voice. As for the visual performance, I love the camaraderie of the other townsfolk and the way they put on this show to participate in Eliza's fantasy. They make do with what they have to help create this imagined scenario, and they all look like they have so much fun together even though they are living in hard times. I'm an ordinary man. This song takes place after Eliza comes to Higgins' house and asks him for lessons. Here, Higgins rants about how women ruin men's lives. Again, this song utilizes sprechgesang, so it's not my favorite song melodically.
Who desires nothing more than just an ordinary chance to live exactly as he likes and do precisely what he wants.
It's not a very catchy song, not memorable, not one that you would really recognize in an overture. I like how the music reflects the chaos of the lyrics every time Higgins starts going a little deeper into how women ruin everything.
Just an ordinary man. But let a woman in your life, and your serenity is through.
And how at the end, they use the fast-forwarded records to make it even more chaotic, like the army of theoretical wife's friends that he describes.
Let a woman in your life. Let a woman in your life.
I think it's funny, the hypocrisy in the song, since Higgins talks about how much of a gentleman he is, when he is actually very rude. With a little bit of luck. This song is sung by Alfred P. Doolittle. During this song, he learns that Eliza is staying with Professor Higgins. This is a catchy little song. I like the 3-part harmony with him and his friends. I like the premise of the song and how Alfred gives examples of what you're supposed to do, but if you're lucky, you won't have to do any of those responsible things.
A man was made to help support his children, but with a little bit of luck, they'll go out and start supporting you.
And I like how the music reflects that. It sounds like a march, circusy at times, maybe like a sea shanty, so it reflects the attitude and character of these men very well. As for the visual performance, I love the little dance that Alfred does. He's really perfect for this role of this slimy father that you can't help but like. And I just love the gag in this scene where Alfred keeps escaping all of the consequences while his friends get the brunt of it. Just you wait. Eliza sings this song after she hits a breaking point and is frustrated with Higgins' teaching methods.
Just you wait, Henry Higgins, just you wait. You'll be sorry, but your tears will be...
First of all, I love that a lot of this song uses Audrey's voice. I think she's perfect for this song. First of all, you can just tell it fits her so much more naturally than the dub, and I love the way she acts it out. I love how despicably angry she is that she's fantasizing about letting Higgins die. Eliza has been practicing her speech lessons, but in this song, her Cockney is still unimproved, and I love how she just repeats Henry Higgins, which emphasizes her Cockney accent. The alliteration of Henry Higgins, when H is the commonly dropped letter in Cockney, is just genius. There are parts of the song that are dubbed by Marnie.
One die or be famous or be proper and prim. Go to St. James.
I think it's way less obvious here than it is in other songs. And also, the parts that are dubbed are more necessary than they are for other songs, because the part that Marnie dubs here is a more operatic and complex vocal line. Wouldn't It Be Lovely isn't complex enough to justify dubbing it, in my opinion, but the dubbing here is necessary at times and fits nicely. And again, I just like this song because it's one of the more melodic songs. Servants Chorus. This song is sung by the servants who are tired of and annoyed with the endless speech lessons, and they feel bad for Higgins that there's been no improvement.
All day long, on his feet, up and down until he's numb.
I think it's a cute little song and works well as a transition song and to let us know how much time has passed and how long they've been practicing at this. The Rain in Spain. This song is where Eliza has a breakthrough and starts being able to pronounce things correctly. So they celebrate this victory and have her recite all of the word exercises they've been practicing.
Rain in Spain, 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 in the plain.
This is definitely one of the most iconic songs of the musical. I like this one because it's one of the songs that is actually sung. It's a little repetitive, but it's a fun little song that shows how improved she's gotten with her word exercises. This one, I also think the dubbing is a little unnatural. It's hard to tell which version would be better though because we don't have access to Audrey's version. I Could Have Danced All Night. Eliza sings this song after she has the breakthrough in her work. This is also one of the most iconic songs of the musical. It's probably my second favorite of the soundtrack.
Your face is broad, all night, your eyes are red. Now say goodnight, please turn up.
There's something about the tune and melody here that I just love so much. I love the excitement and how upbeat it is. The song is almost whimsical, like it's a dream, but it also sounds very regal, like it's marking the beginning of her upwards climb. Most of this song is dubbed, and I again don't think it's the best fit. I do love this song musically, but the meaning behind it for the story doesn't quite make sense to me. It seems like this is a song that was written for another musical maybe, and they threw it in here instead. Or that maybe it was originally going to be used after the embassy ball scene. They do all dance together while they sing Rain in Spain, but in this song she refers to a he. I only know when he began to dance with me, I could have danced, danced, danced all night. It sounds quite romantic, when there really wasn't a romantic moment in the previous scene. So the song feels a little random and out of place, in my opinion. But I do love the song. Its place in the story is the part that is a little iffy for me. Ascot Gavotte. This song is performed by the rich socialites attending the horse race. I love how snobby this song is. The melodies and vocals just sound very uptight and classical, and they all have such posh accents.
Everyone who should be here is here. What a smashing positive.
Musically, it's one of the more average songs for me, but I love it for the character establishment of the upper class and the irony of the performance. Visually, I love how blank-faced everyone is while they sing this song. I love how they all do the same movements, have the same blank stare and blank reaction while they talk about how exciting the race is.
What a frenzied moment that was.
On the Street Where You Live. This song is sung by Freddie, who met Eliza at the horse race and becomes infatuated with her.
Pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I.
This song was also dubbed, and I do feel like it doesn't quite fit Jeremy Brett, but it's far from the worst dub. This is my favorite song from the musical, maybe one of my favorite songs from a musical ever. Ignoring the slight mismatch of the dub, the singing is beautiful and works perfectly with the song, and I love the orchestrations underneath. It's so sweeping and grand. I love the romance and boyish hope of this song. You Did It. In this song, Higgins and Pickering celebrate their victory at the embassy ball. Again, this is another Sprechgesang song. so it's not too memorable or enjoyable for me as a song. It's more like a sort of poem or story.
Tonight, old man, you did it. You did it. You did it. You said that you would do it, and indeed you did.
I appreciate the story that this song tells, how they're so blatantly ignoring Eliza, acting like she's not even there, and ignoring the fact that there would have been no victory at all without her. Eliza gets madder and madder in the background as it goes on, and the men are just talking and talking, completely oblivious to Eliza's feelings. I also enjoy the build-up where they finally tell you what the gossip was about Eliza. How they talk about how Carpathy is this supposed imposter detector, and was so certain that he figured out who Eliza was, only to reveal that he is sure she is a Hungarian princess.
I can tell that she was born Hungarian!
Show me. Eliza sings this song to Freddie as she's leaving Higgins. She's mad that all he does is talk.
Don't talk of stars burning above. If you're in love, show me.
To be honest, I don't really understand this song story-wise. Eliza is mad at Freddie that all he does is talk, but we've never even seen them talk. They talked one time at the horse race, but that was it. Because of this song feels like another song that doesn't quite fit here and was maybe written for another purpose. This is another song that we have the original Audrey vocal recordings. Her voice definitely isn't as strong in this song, but the emotion is there, and the vocal performance is really not bad. Again, I think Marnie's dub doesn't fit naturally with Audrey's appearance. This song does have some complex lines in it, so I think they could have done something similar like they did in Just You Wait, where it's mostly Audrey's voice and then they switch to the dub for the harder bits, particularly the faster tongue-twisting parts of this song. Get Me to the Church on Time. This song is when Eliza goes back to Covent Garden and finds she doesn't fit in anymore. She finds her father all dressed up, having come into a fortune, and who is going to be married the next day. This song is pretty simple and repetitive, but it's fun. I like the lightheartedness of Alfred's songs, which juxtaposes a lot of the seriousness and maturity in the rest of the film. Similar to Alfred's other song, it's funny to see what lengths he will go to avoid getting married. And I love the warmth and fun that this ensemble has.
I'm getting married in the morning. Ding dong, the bells are gonna.
I like some of the gags here, like how when he is finally taken away, he looks like he's being taken to his funeral. A Hymn to Him. Higgins sings this song once he realizes that Eliza is gone. This is one example where it enforces the satirical sexism that Higgins spouts. On face value, this song is very sexist. He goes on about how women are dumb.
Women are irrational, that's all there is to that. Their heads are full of cotton hay and rags. They're nothing but exasperating, irritating, vacillating, calculating, agitating, maddening, and infuriating hags.
But I think this is poking fun at him and how ignorant and oblivious he is. Eliza leaves after the song You Did It, where Higgins celebrates their victory and ignores Eliza so obviously that after he still doesn't understand what she was upset about, I think they must be pointing out how Higgins is actually the dumb one here. A lot of what he's saying about women can be applied to himself. And again, it's comedic, the ridiculous absurdity of him lecturing Mrs. Pierce to her face with some of his brazen statements about the whole of the women population.
Why is thinking something women never do? And why is logic never even tried?
This is another of Higgins' talk singing songs. These really start to get boring and repetitive, and I can't really tell much of a difference between them. It's a little repetitive too because we already know his feelings about this topic, but I guess it is in line with his character that he would go on and on about this and overkill the subject to death. Without You. Eliza sings this to Higgins when he finds her at his mother's house. He asks her to come back, and this is how she responds. Here, Higgins really goes off with his ownership of Eliza, how he feels that she owes him everything and holds that against her as if she now has to do whatever he says. She puts him in his place about how the world doesn't revolve around him, but even at the end of the song, he still doesn't get it and disregards all she says. I like how she uses those speech exercises against him.
Go to Hertford, Hereford, and Hampshire. They can still rule the land without you.
This moment is the height of her transformation, her standing up for herself against Higgins and refusing to let his abuse go on any longer. He doesn't even acknowledge her complaints, just revels in his success some more, which leaves her no choice but to leave. I've grown accustomed to her face. Higgins sings this song after he leaves his mother's house. He realizes that he really will miss Eliza.
Like breathing out and breathing in. I was serenely independent and content before we met.
This is the last song of the musical. Usually, the last song is something grand that you'll be sure to remember. This is just another one of Higgins' boring songs, so it's quite an underwhelming closing number. I don't think it packs much of an emotional punch either, because he basically is just saying he's used to her. In the previous song, Eliza sings a song of independence and how she doesn't need Higgins. In Higgins' song, he talks about how Eliza will fail without him.
I can see her now, not a penny in the till and a bill collector beating at the door.
He's either saying all this because he's mad at her and wants to believe she'll fail without him, or he's saying it because he believes it's true and feels the need to protect her from failure. Either of these options are pretty bad. The first option is obviously just heartless and nasty, but the second version is almost worse because it's saying that he really has no faith in her at all. How would they have a successful relationship if he truly believes these things about her? This song does parallel Eliza's song, Just You Wait, where she fantasizes about letting Higgins die. Her song is an obvious over-exaggeration, since she's dreaming about being friends with the king, and the king following her orders to execute Higgins, while Higgins' song is fantasizing about more realistic consequences. Eliza also sung Just You Wait in a moment of extreme exhaustion and frustration with Higgins. Here, Higgins' dignity is bruised. He's hurt by the fact that a woman would walk out on him, one that he takes ownership over. How is this supposed to be his epiphany love song moment? It's really not that romantic at all, and it's not even catchy. I do like the callback it has to I'm an Ordinary Man. This song uses the chaotic bit of I'm an Ordinary Man, where he starts talking about how women will ruin your life. But in using that part in this song, it's turning it on its head and using it with opposite intention.
It's a most forgiving man. But I shall never take her back. If she were crawling on her knees.
Here, he's using that same chaotic bit, but it's in the song where he realizes that he actually does want a woman in his life. He has finally given in and surrendered to the idea of married life. This song was probably intended to be more of a crack in the facade of his insistence against women starting to fall, but to me, it's just too little too late. Themes. Pro. Conceptual class hierarchy. To me, the story is commenting on class dynamics and personal worth, in a moral sense, not a financial sense. I interpret the story to be saying how class doesn't determine your worth as a person, and how class is almost an abstract concept and can be molded, can be a facade, can be easily faked and manipulated, and doesn't mean much about the value you hold as a person. The story is about being able to trick the rich socialites that Eliza is a princess, simply by changing her way of speaking. And they are successful in the end, which enforces this idea that the class hierarchy is just a subjective, societally contrived category to separate people. The stereotype is often that poor people are the morally bankrupt criminals, stupid and mean, and the rich people are often portrayed to be the morally superior angels. My Fair Lady shares a more complicated and realistic angle. Higgins, one of the wealthy characters, is one of the worst bad actors in the film. He's probably as close to a villain as we get in the film. He's rude, has no manners, and considers no one's feelings. Eliza, who starts out as a poor, unworthy street woman, is never portrayed to be particularly mean or rude, at least when unprovoked, She can get feisty, but this is usually aimed at Higgins, someone who has been treating her rudely since the second they met. Eliza's father, Alfred, is an interesting character, especially because of how he plays with class and associated morals. He is given a more classic portrayal of this stereotypical, shady, slimy poor man. When he hears that Higgins has taken Eliza under his wing, he tries to blackmail Higgins, and in a sense sells his daughter for £5. But once he comes into a large fortune, he immediately puts on this act that he must now act like a respectable man.
What's he done to you?
Ruined me, that's all. Tied me up and delivered me in the hands of middle-class morality. And don't you defend him.
He does what he expects a rich man to do, get married, while Higgins, a rich man, is an eternal bachelor. Colonel Pickering contrasts Higgins by, from the very beginning, having always seen Eliza as a person deserving of respect. The ensemble cast of the rich socialites aren't particularly shown in a good light. They're gossips and snobs and boring. The ensemble cast of the working class are shown to be warm and friendly, imaginative and creative. Many of the characters play with expectations of what you would expect of someone from their place in society. Contradictory ending. The romantic ending contradicts Eliza's character development. If you look at the original works, the 1913 play version of Pygmalion, and the Greek myths that inspired the play, there is this idea of creator and creation and autonomy. The Henry Higgins character feels this ownership of Eliza, who he feels he has created into this regal lady.
What do you mean to say I'm to put on my Sunday manners for this thing that I created out of the squashed cabbage leaves of Covent Garden?
Eliza fights back against this idea and says that he did give her some things, but he didn't give her one of the most important things, respect, which was very vital in her transformation.
It was very difficult. I should never have known how ladies and gentlemen behave if it hadn't been for Colonel Pickering. He always showed me that he felt and thought about me as if I was something better than a common flower girl.
She learns to be more confident and stand up for herself more and more over the course of the story. She comes to know the value of her own self-worth. She leaves Higgins, saying that he never treated her like a lady. After she leaves, he seems to feel bad about it as he sings his final song, but he doesn't quite apologize to the audience, and he definitely doesn't apologize to her before she comes back. This is their last moment together.
Goodbye, Professor Higgins. You shall not be seeing me again.
They never speak again before she shows up at his house to make up, so how would she know that he felt any remorse at all, or that he was willing to treat her differently? What is it saying that Higgins doesn't need to change anything about himself? He doesn't need to apologize, but Eliza will come back regardless of this. It gives credibility to this idea that she belongs to him, her creator, or that she owes him something. Visuals. Pro. Costumes. The costumes are one of the most well-loved aspects of this film. The costume designer, Cecil Beaton, designed the costumes for the Broadway production as well. For the movie, he was said to have created more than 1,500 costumes. Beaton won an Oscar for Best Costume Design for his work on the film. The costumes are absolutely stunning. They are very iconic and have left a huge legacy on pop culture. Of course, there are a few most notable moments. Audrey's horse race gown and ball gown are some of the most memorable fashion moments in film history. They are absolutely beautiful, and of course Audrey doesn't let the costumes wear her. Another moment worth pointing out are the costumes of the horse race attendees. I love the idea of having everyone in variations of black and white, which emphasizes the meaning and irony of the song and performance. While all of these costumes are black and white, I love how Beaton's creativity is apparent with how he was able to create such a large number of distinct and original, yet cohesive, costumes. Audrey's bit of color on her hat and bag allude to her standing out in some way, whether for her beauty, or because she is undergoing this test as an outsider, or just because she's not a stick in the mud like the rest of these snobs. Problematic aspects. Disclaimer. I want to talk about some of the problematic aspects of the story. I'm not going to say whether these are a pro or a con. It's more just something that I want to present. You can take what you want from these points. People have different tolerance levels, and there are different things that will trigger different responses from people. I just thought it would be interesting to point out all the things that I noticed that might not have aged too well. It's up to you to decide whether you think any of these scenes or moments would be a deal breaker. If you want to cut them some slack for the time period it was made in, if you think intent matters, for example, anything is fair in comedy or satire, or if you think some of these problematic moments are excusable in this created, fantastical story. Higgins' sexism. Higgins is sexist. There's no question about that. I do think that he is purposely sexist to portray him as this crotchety, grumpy guy with outdated ideals, but who still means well. I think this misses the mark, as I've said before, but I do think he was written to be sexist satirically. Eliza's consent. Eliza's consent in participating in this experiment is at best questionable. Eliza seems almost mentally ill in the beginning. It could just be Audrey's over-the-top performance, but she scowls and screams at things that are as simple as taking a bath. I honestly felt bad for her when Higgins takes her in. She screams bloody murder to let her go, but he almost blackmails her to stay. It definitely seems like taking advantage of a mentally ill person and disregarding her lack of consent. I think it's supposed to be funny, but to me it's really awkward and concerning to watch because of how far it goes. Also, she is overworked to a clear exhaustion point for the duration of her stay. Freddie is a stalker. Freddie is a bit of a stalker. He meets Eliza once and then camps outside of her house every day and night. I think he's pretty respectful about it, but some people might think he goes a bit too far. Eliza coming back to Higgins. This might not necessarily be problematic, but can be seen as anti-feminist. Eliza gains independence and puts her foot down against Higgins disrespecting her and controlling her, and then just goes crawling back, some might say out of weakness. Also, the forcing of this romantic ending gives off the impression that she is Higgins' reward, or that a man and woman are unable of having any type of platonic relationship. The romance. Higgins and Eliza's relationship becomes romantic at the end of the film. This romance brings on a lot of other issues to consider. There's a questionable age gap. Like I said earlier, Higgins did not treat Eliza well, as friends or as her tutor/host, so I would doubt he would treat her any better as his love interest. He is also her teacher and her access to upward mobility, which creates a power imbalance and pressure for Eliza to comply with his demands. Relatively minor issues. The good thing is that a lot of these points can be reworked. They can be altered or removed entirely and the show would still remain the same for the most part. For example, the most recent Broadway revival of My Fair Lady changed the ending so that it's not romantic. Audience and critical reception. Con. Audrey's casting. There definitely was controversy surrounding Audrey's casting and dubbing. It's difficult to tell what percentage of audiences disagreed with her casting, but it must have been significant enough to lead to her not receiving an Oscar nomination. Pro. Reception and accolades. The film did very well. It was the second highest grossing film of 1964. The film was nominated for 12 Academy Awards and won 8. They won the awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Art Direction, Color, Best Cinematography, Color, Best Costume Design, Color, Best Scoring and Music, Adaptation or Treatment, and Best Sound. Pro. Legacy. The film was definitely a substantial undertaking and broke some records along the way. They spent an unprecedented amount for the film rights, and at the time it was the most expensive film ever shot in the United States, with a production budget of $17 million. The film made the American Film Institute's Greatest American Films of All Time list and ranks number 91. It's also ranked number 8 in AFI's Greatest Movie Musicals list. It is still one of the most beloved movies and movie musicals of all time, whether that be for Audrey's legacy, the dedication of loyal musical theater fans, the beautiful visuals, the sets and costumes, or the classic story of an average girl plucked from obscurity and turned into a princess. That concludes my list of pros and cons. I don't want to quantify them and say there's more pros than cons, which therefore means the movie is good. One pro point might be a very significant one, so it doesn't really weigh out properly. But I did just want to talk about all the things that stood out to me about the film, positive or negative, and use those points to start a discussion about the film. I do have to say that doing all this research has given me a new appreciation for the movie, and especially I think I needed a second viewing to really understand it. I really needed to take the time to delve into the film more than I usually would. I do have some problems with the film, mostly it just being a little dull for my taste. I think it's a musical for people who don't like musicals. It's a bit too serious and stuffy for my taste. Some of the songs verge on whether they're even songs at all, and there's no dance numbers, which is rare for a musical. But I am appreciative of any musical being made into a movie because it makes it more accessible for people to experience. Although it's not my favorite, I do like it. It's just not one I would watch over and over again, but it definitely has an overall positive association for me. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any recommendations for other movies to cover, go ahead and let me know your suggestions. Thanks for watching!